Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It is Test cricket time again. A diet of white ball cricket over the course of the last several months, including a rip-storming World Cup and some T20s from all over the world as well. Those are in our podcast feed, of course, for you to dip back into, including Finn Allen's heroics in the recent series, New Zealand versus Pakistan. But we are going to talk some Test cricket. The Anthony de Mello Trophy, starting with who is Anthony de Mello. We'll talk grounds and dates, squads and selection questions, key battles and matchups, and of course our ubiquitous incorrect predictions, all coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, going to hand over to Stu to give us a little bit of an explainer about this series, starting with who is Anthony de Mello and what does his trophy look like?
Oh, what does this trophy look like? I haven't done that much digging. I haven't done that much digging. I know there's screeds of paper here, but none of them have any pictures on them.
No pictures.
So, nothing about what the trophy actually looks like. But I did get intrigued by the name of the trophy because I was actually doing it because I was looking up the last series, in India, the 2021 series. And, when you look all that stuff up, the name of the trophy comes up. We've obviously just had the Beno Kadir Trophy, which I thought was a
enormous trophy.
Brilliant naming, trophy name. And then Anthony de Mello, and I was like, who is Anthony de Mello? What does he do? And so type in Anthony de Mello into Google, and then got even more confused because basically what came up after that was an Indian Jesuit priest and author who had some dealings or criticisms from one of the popes, I think, at one point. And I was like, what is going on? So you do the same thing, Anthony de Mello cricket, and it turns out that the trophy is named after one of the founders of the BCCI, Anthony de Mello. So that is your fun fact for the day. But in terms of this series, we've got a 5-match Test series, which we don't see a huge amount of, obviously, these days. We've just seen the Ashes, but apart from that, it's only really these big marquee series between the big three where we even get that. The last series, as I mentioned, in 2021, we didn't get 5 matches. It was only 4. So it starts on the 25th of Jan and runs all the way through to almost mid-March. So we've got a brilliant diet of Test cricket coming up if this series can live up to the billing.
Baldy, will it live up to the billing?
Oh, hell yes, it will. This is going to be an exciting Test series. Bazball against India in India. It's delicious. It's finger-licking good. It's exciting. I can't wait for it to get started.
I kind of thought we might start talking about this series and thinking about what happened last time, because I think thinking about how much has changed since that 2021 series for both sides, really, or probably more so for England, because India has still continued on their winning ways. But, when we look through the lineups, I think they've seen a reasonable amount of turnover in terms of their Test side and what it might look like within that time. But when I looked back, when I think back to 2021, where India won the series 3-1, but England, who were, I think, at one of their low points in Test cricket, they were not seen as a good Test cricket side. You look through their lineup, it was Burns, Sibley, Dan Lawrence, Root, Stokes, Pope, Butler, Dom Best, Jofra Archer, Jack Leach and Jimmy Anderson for that first Test. But they won that Test by 227 runs. Joe Root got 218 in the first innings. Sibley and Stokes made 80s that set up this big first innings for England, and a big win by 227 runs or whatever it was. And then the series just changed. India, in the pitches might have slightly changed a little bit since then. They became a lot more spin friendly. Enter Axar Patel, who completely demolished England for the rest of that series. Their highest total from the next 3 tests was 205. They scored 134, 167, or 164, 112, 81, 205, and 135. So, runs were at a premium after that point. And basically, India's the tests that we've seen in India have kind of followed that mould, and we've seen England completely change the way they play cricket since then. So, I think sort of maybe interesting to get your perspective, Binksy, on kind of where England is at now, looking into this series compared to where they were last time.
Yeah, well, I think going into that series, England were in a period of, I guess, probably pre-transition, weren't they? They'd got,
And we still thought Dom Sibley and Rory Burns might be the opening partnership for a little while.
Well, look, Absolutely, and I think if you kind of look at some of the markers throughout that first Test match, played on a very good wicket in Chennai, and then I'm not going to say they were poor wickets, but spinning wickets throughout the rest of the series, because I don't want to annoy Rohit Sharma, but they certainly were absolute Bunsen's. I think categorised by the fact that Joe Root, I think in the third Test, took his only 5-wicket haul in Test cricket. He's probably a little underrated as a bowler, but he shouldn't be taking too many 5-wicket bags. Contrast where England are now, I think they're going to go into this series with a hell of a lot of confidence, and whether that confidence is actually founded in the fact that they have a chance in this series, we'll come on to, I think, throughout the course of the podcast, but they will definitely be going into it with confidence, because that's the environment that's been created. We've got to, and I think from an English cricket perspective and from my point of view, I've got to get off this fact that this is rhetoric now. This is the way that this team thinks, it's the way that this team feels, and it's the way that this team's going to go about their cricket. Every single interview, every single comment, every single bit of press I've seen about the players, they are, if they're not being authentic, they're doing a really, really good job of pretending to be authentic. And listening to an interview, for example, with Ben Duckett a couple of days back, and he said, I'm just going to use my reverse sweep as a forward defensive, because I know that it's going to spin at times, and I'm not going to die wondering. I'm not going to pop one up to bat pad, and if I do, it's going to be doing something that's that's aggressive, and that's not one example of that. That is the way that all of these guys are talking about the level of confidence that they're going to go into the series with, and then I think also, just even if they come off on the wrong side of a defeat, they're going to say, well, cool, no problem, we'll come back and we're going to try the same methods and the same mentality the next time. And if that doesn't work, they'll do the same again. And until that changes, I think I'm now fully bought into this rhetoric of the way the team's going to go about it, and the premise of I know we use it as a cliche now, but the premise of Bazball.
I think we'll talk a bit more about the mentality, I'm sure, as we go through. But almost the same question to you, Baldy, about the India side and kind of where you think they are, because as I said before, they've come off, they've continued to win pretty significantly for the last 3 years since that series. They obviously were in the World Test Championship final. They were in the World Test Championship final before that as well. But I think when you look at the lineup, I think there were a couple of changes from that first test, but the one that I wrote down that they lost, their lineup was Rohit, Shubman Gill, Pujara, Kohli, Rahane, Pant, Washington Sundar, Ashwin, Shabazz Nadeem, who kind of ended up being the scapegoat almost, or kind of just the forgotten figure, because as we said, the pitches became much more spin friendly after that, and Axar just dominated. And then Ishant Sharma and Bumrah. There's not many survivors from 3 years ago from that Test series. So where do you think they're at? I mean, they've just come off a series against South Africa where the conditions were completely different to what we expect them to be here.
Yeah, it's really interesting for India, because they have a formula, they have a way of playing cricket at home that's been tremendously successful for the last 3 years. They have developed the habit of winning overseas as well, so they have confidence going not to just win at home but win overseas, and I think that has huge impact on being able to win at home as well, just that confidence of being able to take on a side in any conditions. But I'm with you, Adam, in that I think that the Bazball approach to trying to take as many wickets as possible by trying to attack and take wickets by taking them rather than having batters make mistakes, and then also by attacking the bowling to try and hit them off their length, is England's best chance of success in this Test series against India. I don't think England would go to India and try and play the grind it out, wear them down type of cricket and come away with a victory against this Indian side. For India, I think their method for success is to take that on head on and go, right, okay, we're going to ask the same questions of you that we always do. We are going to bowl our spinners stump to stump. We are going to bowl the ball at the stumps all the time. And if you're going to use the reverse sweep to use that as your forward defence, well, let's see if it's going to work. And I think this is going to be a tremendous series from asking questions of each other. I think that this is going to be similar to the 05 Ashes tour, in that there are going to be lots and lots of high quality, entertaining sort of games within games, sessions within sessions, matchups within this series, and it's just so exciting to think about some of those permutations of, you know, Axar versus the top order and so forth. So a very exciting series.
And you know, I really want to dig into a couple of these key battlegrounds, because I do think there are some really, really fascinating ones that you both already touched on. But you mentioned the pitches before and the conditions and what we can expect. These games are at 5 test venues that are relatively new test venues. I think between them, there's only been 12 games at these 5 venues. They're not the big traditional venues that we sort of expect when we go over to India. India has never lost at these venues. They've played 12 games for 9 wins and 3 draws. But, I mean, are we just expecting them to be very spin-friendly, but, you know, like how spin-friendly, I suppose, do we expect them to be? And the pitches have been such a big topic of conversation in the last 12 months, I think, in terms of, the Australia-India series. Even when this last 2021 series, there was a lot of conversations around some of those pitches at that point. We've just seen New Zealand go to Bangladesh, where I think that second test was absolutely atrocious. But we've also seen, you know, in this test in South Africa, that India and South Africa just played at, where it was pretty atrocious the other way, you know, in terms of favouring the seamers. So, what are we kind of thinking? Are we going to see a battleground where 300 is a very good total?
Yeah, look, there's not enough data really on the grounds to kind of even probably keep the analysts in business, is there? To kind of come up with some permutations. I think the reality is that whether or not India pick a balanced attack of a couple of seamers and 3 spinners, or 3 seamers and 2 spinners, or however they roll the dice with the permutations, they've got quality new ball and seam bowling options. So I think from that perspective, you know, they can really produce whatever wickets they like and still be competitive. I don't think there's any doubt that they have an edge from a spin perspective with Axar, Ashwin, Jadeja, anyone else
they want to bring
that they want to bring into the mix when you compare it with the England spinners. The one thing I would say though, I think if you look at what Bazball, and look, we keep using that phrase, and look, we're going to just have to live with the fact that this is the way that we describe it now. But one of the premises of that is creating chaos, and I think if India let England create chaos on good cricket wickets, they will still then have the ability to be better on those cricket wickets with all of their spin bases covered and a very, very good batting lineup. If they do try and go absolute Bunsons, that does, to an extent, bring in a little bit of jeopardy that one of these guys like a Leach or a Hartley or a Bashir or a Ryan Ahmed or even a Joe Root, took 5 for on a spinning deck in the last series that we talked about, they could then have a little bit of a day out and all of a sudden put India under pressure. So I think, personally, India should produce wickets that spin, but that are ultimately, I guess, good spinning wickets. I don't think they should be going in there and trying to produce a 4-day pitch on day one, because I think that just lets the chaos theory that Bazball will create get more into the game.
I completely agree with you, and I think it actually works the other way around too. When England are batting, and if this is let's just say for the sake of the argument that India produce wickets where the target score, the kind of par score is 180, right, which is 220. What happens if Harry Brook comes off and gets 70 off 30 balls?
Or Ben Duckett or Zach Crawley.
Or anyone, right? Yeah. Like, producing low-scoring wickets in this test series kind of plays into the risk-taking hands, as you've said, from both perspectives. And if one of the England guys comes off and gets a 70 off 30, not only do they advance the game a hell of a lot, but they also then have to go, okay, well, now India have got to get those same 70 runs against Anderson, Robinson, Leach, Atkinson, Mark Wood, etc. And if the ball, if it's a really dry surface and a really dry ground, and we start to see reverse as well, there's some pretty good exponents of reverse swing in that England attack. So I think genuinely good cricket wickets where you're looking at, 1,400 to 1,500 runs as your target score across 5 days and 40 wickets being taken, that still gives India, if they bat first, bowl last, 3 spinners to throw at England on day 4, day 5. And even if they bat second, they've got that vaunted top 6 batting lineup that can still go big and score 400, 500 when it's best for batting.
And Stuart, I guess I got a question for you that leads into that conversation around pitches a little bit, which is the spinners that England have selected. So if I kind of look back over recent England cricketing history, and when I say recent, probably since I've been watching, so back into the 1990s, whenever we've gone overseas and it's going to be a spin friendly set of conditions, with the exception of probably going to India in, I think it was 2012 when we last won there with Graham Swan and Monty Panesar. Let's take that out of the equation because that is the anomaly. England have always struggled to find the second and third spin options that they need to take, and they've ended up taking punts on guys that ultimately I think are quite, in a way, old-fashioned spinners, guys that give it a rip, that bowl some shite, but they might bowl the odd absolute, jaffa. And if we go back even to the recent series in 2021, that was someone like Dom Bess, who gives it a real rip, but doesn't have a lot of control. The way they've gone this way is they've picked 2 guys that are 6 foot plus and probably look a little bit physically more like a Ravi Ashwin or an Axar Patel. And they're saying, well, we're going to go, height, accuracy, and probably not massive turn. Is that going to give them any chance? Clearly they're not going to be able to replicate Ravi Ashwin and Axar Patel and Jadeja with 47 Test wickets between them. 47 first Class wickets between them, or whatever it is. But is that the right way for them to have gone in terms of picking these spinners?
I mean, I probably don't know enough about the 2 unknowns in terms of Hartley and Bashir to really make an informed comment on that. But I will say, you touched on it earlier, I think Joe Root will play a pretty big part in this series in terms of what he offers with the ball. I think he's become much better than a part-timer. He's a legitimate part of their bowling attack almost in all conditions now. I'm not saying he's a world beater in all conditions, but I think he'll be someone who actually gives them quite a bit of versatility in what they want to do with their bowling lineup. Because, look, and it'd be asking a lot of him to be the second spinner, because it'd be a lot of work to do, is more the question whether they want to put that workload on him. But I think that's a realistic thing that they could consider if they think that they really, because I think they probably really want a seamer, like a rapid seamer. They've shown that by picking Wood and Atkinson. I think Atkinson's someone who, if they weren't, I feel like they've picked him either as Mark Wood insurance or picked him as someone because they don't want Mark Wood to play all 5 tests and go, okay, well, like, we do genuinely want a speedster in the lineup no matter what, because in some ways that can take out the pitch. They can run in and bowl and regardless of the conditions still cause troubles. And I think if you look back to recent overseas series for England, Jimmy Anderson and Ollie Robinson both have played really important roles. And I think that's been one of the underrated parts of Bazball, the kind of era that we've talked about. A lot of the praise and sort of the discussion around how they play their cricket has all been about the batting and the batting speed. But they take 20 wickets in every test. And a lot of that has come down to like clever captaincy, but also the seamers and just people like Ollie Robinson and Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad when he was playing, just running in and taking wickets. And, I think that it feels unlikely that they will not pick a second spinner. In my head, if they pick a second one, it'd probably be Rehan Ahmed, because of the difference that he has, and he's probably offers a bit more with the bat, if I'm, in that sense. But I really don't know what they'll do, and I think that in that way, Joe Root offers them a lot of versatility. So, that's one of my big questions going in. What will England kind of do with their bowling attack?
I really like England's selection policy to pick Hartley and Shoaib Bashir. If the thinking behind it is we're going to almost go like for like up against Axar and Ashwin and co, mainly in terms of like, okay, if you guys want to have really like big spinning wickets where accuracy is at a premium, we can match you with that. We can't match you in terms of the test wickets, but we can provide a similar style of bowler. For me, if I'm India, I'm looking at that and going, okay, the better the cricket wickets are, the more our spinners distinguish themselves from England's spinners, because our spinners are still proven on all conditions. The only guy who's really proven in all conditions for England is Jack Leach, and to a lesser extent Joe Root. So I think the better you make the wickets if you're in India, the less it takes into account the variability of, okay, maybe a guy like Shoaib Bashir can come in and get 5 or 6 wickets because he's doing the same kinds of things that our guys are doing, and the pitch is helping him out a lot. Whereas if the pitch isn't helping him out a lot, then a guy like Axar can still take wickets, but he's executing more of that kind of differentiating skill set that he has potentially.
I feel like we've kind of segued nicely now into sort of squad discussions and selection questions. I think for India, we've almost named, I think, what we expect the bowling attack to be, and that they'll play, if conditions are suitable, they'll play Jadeja, Ashwin, Axar as their frontline 3 spinners, and Siraj and Bumrah sort of stand out in their squad as the 2 seamers that will play, and I think again could cause trouble in any conditions. There's such quality bowlers. Bumrah in particular, I've just been so impressed since he's come back from his injury about feels like he's even added to his repertoire of skills. So that feels like it's determined. On the England front, like, you kind of looked at me with question marks about who their second spinner might be, and also, do you think I'm right in thinking that they will try and have a speedster in their lineup at all times?
Yeah, look, I think maybe let's we'll come back to India, because I think there are some question marks around their permutations, and we talked about it a little bit off air. I think I'm just purely talking about bowling attacks right now. I think there are questions really. I think that it's sort of almost the reverse for England and India. I think there are some questions for India to answer maybe in their batting lineup. Yeah, so I think from a bowling perspective for England, the reason I kind of looked at you quizzically and you've actually got me thinking is probably just with the talk of Bashir and Hartley coming into the squad, and Rayan Ahmed, who toured obviously with England to Pakistan last year, and I think got 5 on debut. I wonder whether he is going to play, and I'll go back to the comment around England have picked historically a first spinner, and that's been Graham Swan for a period of time. Prior to that it was probably someone like an Ashley Giles, and then they've taken someone else, normally a leg spinner, to give a point of difference. I think when you look at the Indian attack, okay, you've got Ashwin, who's a right arm off spinner, Axar, who's tall left arm spinner, and then Jadeja, who's quite a tall left arm spinner, that really do fire the ball into the wicket. I actually just wonder whether they go Leach. I think plays because he's the only proven spinner in that England squad. But if they play 2 spinners, I wouldn't be surprised that they actually go, do you know what, if Hartley's the better option, regardless of the fact that he's got the same action as Leach, he's a very different bowler, there's a point of difference there. And then I think from a seam perspective, they're absolutely, I think, going to go with either Wood or Atkinson. So I think they'll probably start the series, with Wood if he's fit, because he's the number 1 speedster. And then I think they'll go with either Anderson or Robinson. They've got a couple of decent breaks during the course of this Test series. I think you mentioned at the start, it obviously kicks off end of Jan, finishes towards the end of March. There's 2 sort of week-long, 8-9 day breaks in between a couple of the games. So I think they can actually play someone in maybe 4 of those games if they get the sequencing right. But I think it'll be a kind of rotation conversation between Anderson, Robinson, and Wood and Atkinson. And then I think for me that leads into how they get the batting lineup and how they pick or not pick Ben Foakes. And that's, again, if I come back to the Bazball mentality, I don't think they will go, we need to get an extra bowler in because we might be in the field for a little while. We need someone to bowl some holding overs and therefore protect our speedsters. I think they'll go, game plan is take 20 wickets or 10 wickets as quickly as you can. We're going to go with, if we think 4 guys does that more quickly than 5 guys, we're not going to compromise the way that we select that side. So I hope for that reason. They do go with Foakes keeping wicket and batting at 7. I think that means they can get Bairstow in the side as well at 6, Brook at 5. Then I think that means that Ollie Pope misses out. Mm-hmm. There is a caveat to that, which is we don't really know if Ben Stokes is fit. He's had knee surgery just before Christmas. Yes, his Instagram rehab looks to be going great, but we don't know. So Pope's the vice captain, I think, still.
Yeah, I feel like that would be a surprise, because then they're doing the same thing that they did in the Ashes, where you're trying to figure out who bats 3, right? Or is just Bairstow just go up there?
I just wonder whether Root goes up to 3.
Has all the conversation been around Joe Root doesn't want to bat at 3?
Yeah, but I think, again, throw that out the window with this regime. If they say, mate, you're going to bowl 12 overs in an innings and bat 3. So look, this is my...
Like the club cricket thing. They're making that deal to him. Look, you can bat 3 if you... we'll give you a few overs as well.
And you don't have to pay your subs, yeah. Look, I don't know. And I'm only going on, what from all the talk and all the different pundits and everybody that's got an opinion on this is kind of, I've thrown that all into the hopper. That's the way that I would go, given the parameters that are available to me, and that means a debut for Hartley or Bashir as the second spinner alongside Jack Leach. So look, if you've got any money, go and just back Ollie Pope batting at 3, Root at 4, and Bairstow keeping the gloves. But that would be the way that I would go for that.
Binksy, why have you gone with Foakes at 7? Other than we know that you like to have a genuine specialist keeper, and you think that Ben Foakes is the best wicket keeper in England, if not the world. But why is it super important that he keep wicket in India specifically?
I think it's super important that he keeps wicket in India for 2 reasons. Number one is he's not the worst batsman in the world as well. So
yeah,
I think
good at average.
He actually, it's not like he's Bob Taylor and he's at number 11 and then the best keeper in the world. And then I think that the other component is the quickest way to 10 wickets in the subcontinent and in India is to only have to convert 10 chances. And I think that we are going to see the odd nick or 2 standing up, the odd stumping chance, and with all due respect, Bairstow's going to miss a few, and we might have to take 14 chances. So I think that's the best way of taking 10 wickets quickly, and we still get Bairstow in the side. The gamble is a different gamble to the gamble that we would have talked about 3 or 4 years ago, before the advent of the way that England are playing cricket, which is they would have needed the insurance policy of a third seamer. I don't think they do now, because they're going to go out and blitzkrieg it in terms of the way that they're going to play. They want to do things quickly. They want to put people under pressure. And again, I just, we've had this conversation a lot of times about spin bowling. You can only bowl 2 of them. So why pick 3 of them? I think it's a slightly different conversation in India. From a seam perspective, you can only bowl 2 of them. So why pick 3 of them, particularly when the wickets are going to spin?
Potentially.
And I think even to those seamers, if one of them is going to be Anderson or Robinson, if not both of them, then there's a good chance that Foakes in particular could be standing up to them. So that becomes important in that sense as well.
Yeah. I'm 100% with you. I 100% agree with you that Foakes is the way to go, because this series could turn on a made leg side stumping standing up to Jimmy Anderson. That's what it could come down to. 5 tests could all come down to that one moment. And if you had to back one of those 2 guys, as good as Johnny Bairstow is as a cricketer, I think Foakes gives you the best chance of winning that key moment.
In talking about wicket keeping, though, India have a similar question on their hands. They just played KL Rahul as their wicket keeper over in South Africa. Baldy, you mentioned last time, about the versatility and the ability that playing him at 6 or wicket keeping, 5 or wherever you want to bat him in the lineup, but having him with the gloves gives India a lot of versatility. Reading the tea leaves, it sounds like KS Bharat is more likely to play. You know, that's just, again, from looking at all the media around and people that are commenting. Yeah, Binksy's showing me some, for people who are not watching on YouTube, he's showing me all these links that say that KS Bharat is going to be the wicketkeeper
and we don't
during
know
the
that,
series.
but there's some press out there that, you know, that there's been some official word from the BCCI that Bharat, not KL Rahul, is going to keep in that first test match. And again, I'll let Baldy weigh in on this, but I think that's a mistake from India for all the reasons for all the opposite reasons. But that, you know, they've got they've got plenty of insurance policies throughout the course of that team, and I just don't think they need that with the cattle that they've got. But yeah, Baldy, interested in your thoughts. You're going to go with the keeper, aren't you?
No, well, it's an interesting one, because if you think about the way that India are constructed, their 5 bowlers are locked in. So if you play Bharat, he has to bat at 6.
Or 7, yeah.
Well, I'm assuming that like Jadeja
can kind of bat wherever they want him to, right?
That he can kind of bat at 5 and all that kind of stuff. But let's say that he bats at 7. It means that your wicketkeeper has to bat at 6, which means you're effectively now picking 5 batters. You don't have Hardik Pandya, so you don't have any extra bowling. So you've got no sort of all-rounder to throw in there. There's no Washington Sundar.
I think you could make a pretty good case that Ravi Jadeja and Ravi Chandran Ashwin are two of the better all-rounders that you could find. And even Axar Patel, actually.
At 7, 8, 9, they've got plenty of batting. Ooh. If those guys are going to bat 7, 8, 9, they've got plenty of batting. I think the question that India will want to know, and Indian fans will want to know, is who's going to bat in that top 5 and what's the construct of that top 5 if KL Rahul is not wearing the gloves. Because I think there's a case of if he's not batting in the top 5 if he's not wearing the gloves, does he even get into the test side?
Apparently, yeah. Look, again, this is the first sort of report here from the Indian Express, which is saying the BCCI have said that Rahul will be on the field as a batsman and fielder. Bharat will do the job, mainly down to the fact that they believe it will be a spinning wicket.
So same reasons you've given.
Right. I mean, he's just scored 100 in really tough conditions in South Africa. I think he, certainly warrants his spot. I think you're looking at guys like Shreyas Iyer, and probably even as much as I love him, Yashasvi Jaiswal is obviously only just come into the side. You could bump Shubman Gill up to open. I think
he said he wants to bat at 3 though, Shubman Gill, right? So
did Joe Root.
So did Joe Root. Maybe they'll offer Shubman Gill a few overs with the ball.
It's a really, really interesting quandary for India, because I think KL Rahul has to be in there, but then you're talking about guys like Shreyas Iyer or Gill or Jaiswal missing out. Rohit's a lock. Kohli's a lock. Kohli's a lock? We sure? Kohli's a lock?
I think he might be.
Kohli's probably a lock. Which means you're toying with that last batting spot for KL Rahul or a guy like Shreyas Iyer. So plenty of questions, as we've said, on that Indian batting lineup. But it's just permutations. They've got so much depth. It's really ridiculous.
What about some of the key battlegrounds then? We've kind of touched on a little bit, but let's go into a bit more depth. I think the really interesting one is about the mindset, because when I think about other sides that have taken on this England side with this Bazball mentality, I really do think that the captains and the opposition have kind of been affected by the way that England's come out and played. I think, you look back to certainly that first series where it all happened, that New Zealand took part in. I think that the way England approached that, New Zealand, it put New Zealand on the back foot, and they didn't really know how to approach. And by the time they figured out an approach, it was too late in some of those situations. I think Babar Azam, the same thing happened to them in that Pakistan series. I think he was sort of started to be panned, I think, for his captaincy by the end of that series, because of the way that he became very reactive to what England were doing rather than focusing on his own situations. We saw in the Ashes, Pat Cummins took a lot of criticism because, not necessarily because he reacted to England, but he made plans for England, and they became very they on the outside looked very, very defensive. So they took a different approach, that this is how we're going to play our cricket. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how India approach it when, these spinners, Axar, and Ashwin and Jadeja, who are so used to being able to settle in and bowl, just get into a line and length and figure out how that, Axar, his great skill is that he can just run in and bowl the same delivery over and over and over again. And in good, spinning conditions, one of those balls with his height hits the turf, bounces up a bit higher, catches an edge, and someone's out. If England's going to go really hard, I'm fascinated to see how Rohit in particular responds to that with fields, with bowling changes. How do you guys think that's all going to play out?
The first thing I'd just say, and I don't want to get too carried away, but Bazball's been moderately successful from a results perspective, right? So we're talking about a series in New Zealand where, we lost a brilliant test match at the Basin Reserve. Mm-hmm. We're talking about an Ashes series that was 2-2. Yes, we've panned, a couple of nations. We did really, really well in Pakistan last year. Beat India at home, beat New Zealand at home, beat South Africa at home. So
I think these feel like pretty good results.
Yeah, no, they do, but I'm just saying we're talking about this as that we've gone on a run like the 1948 Invincibles. We haven't, and I think the interesting thing is going to be whether Rohit blinks or not, and that's going to be, I think, a little bit of pride and ego as to whether or not when someone starts to get after one of those spinners and inevitably comes off for a short period of time, whether he goes on the defensive or whether he goes, do you know what, keep going, and you're going to make a mistake. When it comes to battlegrounds and matchups, the thing that I am probably most interested to see is I think we're going to see throughout the course of this series, yes, we've got the likes of Siraj, Bumrah, and a new cricket ball. I think we're obviously going to see spin really early in the day and potentially even, opening the bowling. Ravi Ashwin's done that before, I believe. So I am fascinated to see how that matchup works because England have got something pretty unusual, I think, from a test cricketing perspective, and that's an opening batter who is a very, very good player, perhaps vaunted as a better player of spin than he is of seam, and that's Ben Duckett. So when we went into that series against Australia, everyone was like, there's no way that this lad is going to score runs against Cummins, Hazelwood and Stark because he plays at everything and he's going to nick one eventually. And he had a pretty good summer.
He had a really good series against Australia.
Ben Duckett. So we're now going to see him play, with all of his sweeps and all of his innovation from a batting perspective. So those are the matchups that I'm really looking forward to, is the top order players. We know that Joe Root's a fantastic player of spin. We know that Ben Stokes is a pretty good player of spin. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that new ball, or newish ball at least, against that England top order, and see whether England can actually do what they've done to some seam attacks against a world class spin attack.
Do you want to elaborate on that, Baldy? Because I think that in a way is sort of both of those battlegrounds are kind of covered by what you've just talked about, because England's approach to the batting and against spin is going to determine in many ways how Rohit has to respond to what they have to do.
I mean, Rohit's at an advantage, I think, because he's got more cattle to choose from in terms of he's got 5 world-class players at his disposal.
If bowling attackers.
If England are going after one, he can switch out for a Bumrah for a spell of 3 or 4 overs, and even if the ball's old, he's still going to get something out of Bumrah. He's still going to get something out of Siraj. He's still going to get something out of his any one of his, or any 2 of his 3 spinners. So I think Rohit, even if he blinks, he's still got options to turn to.
While you're on that, do you think that we will see big in-out fields against their spinners? It's not. I feel like it's not something we've seen very often against the Indian spinners in India.
No, but I think it's something that they will consider, because I think the outfielders can still be in catching positions if England are going to take them on and trying to hit them off their length. So in-out fields could be a recipe for success for India, even if their traditional modus operandi has been to, as you say, dump the ball into and on the line of the stumps and have either the straight one do the job, which it so often does for Axar and Jadeja, or one that turns big. I think in terms of will Rohit blink, he will at some point in this series, I think. I think he's going to be under pressure at some point, and he will have to revert to plans B, C and D. And I think we'll find out just how good a captain Rohit is when he's forced to do that, because other captains who've played against this England setup have come in with different plans, whether or not we agree with their level of attackingness and whether or not it's in the national psyche to do that. Regardless, India traditionally, when you think about the teams over the last 4 or 5 years that have been successful at home and successful away, are prepared to take on opposition at their strength. Have a look at that India side in Australia. Take on Australia at their strength. I think this Indian side will attack England at their strength. Particularly, they'll attack their batters and they'll ask lots and lots of questions of their batters, as they traditionally have. I think it will take a lot for Rohit to blink, but I think he's going to have to at some point. It's a fascinating battleground. The one for me that I'm really looking forward to is whether these England openers can see off enough of the new ball so that by the time these Indian spinners come into the attack, they're relatively set. Because that's the key battleground for me. If there are set batters against these Indian bowlers, these spinners, when they come on to bowl, that's real danger time for India, because you can hit their guys off their length. It's very, very difficult to start in India, regardless of how good a player of spin you are. So if Duckett and Crawley can win that opening battle against Bumrah and Siraj, and they're set, particularly Duckett, they're set by the time a spinner comes on, Duckett will fancy himself to take them down, and that's where I think there's going to be a huge battleground to be won over 10 innings in this series.
I think India will attack actually with the bat as well. I really feel like watching India South Africa series, and particularly the last couple of innings where they knew that those pitches were challenging. Rohit just went, stuff this, I'm going, and he just started smashing it.
Yep.
And I think that he'll have that very similar approach, again, if he can kind of survive the early overs from whoever it is, whether it's Anderson or Robinson, or even if Mark Wood gets a crack with the new ball, I think he's going to have a real dip at those spinners. I mean,
I think he'll go after Leach.
Yeah,
they'll really target Leach, I think.
And if they do, I mean, what does England do if India can take their spinners out of the equation? Is that just game over?
Look, who knows? I think you talked about it earlier on. One of the things that has been impressive is if Robinson can get himself and has got himself fit. We know that Anderson is pretty fit. They still have the ability and have worked out ways, particularly with the field settings that they've gone through, to actually get players out in those wickets. And I, with due respect to other people who've gone and done this, Australia actually did a pretty good job at times. And I thought Cummins' captaincy in that India series was underrated. He did come up with some different plans, but I think not sort of taken away from that. I think England have done really, really well at figuring out how to take wickets, not nicked off bowling their seamers. So I think England will always, fancy that they're going to have another plan and be willing to try stuff as well.
Yep.
I don't think it's a case of them being able to say we're going to literally take the spinners out of the game and it's all over. Yes, there'll be periods, I think, where the Indian batters will get on top. And look, I think that's why, particularly this pick of Bashir and Hartley is the really interesting one for me. They're probably a different proposition to what India would have expected. They would have probably expected a Rayan Ahmed or the next spinner off the rank, a Don Best maybe to come back in. They're picking someone that they think is going to make a difference and replicate what Axar and Ashwin tried to do.
England have really got to hold their nerve if India attack, because as we saw in the World Cup, Rohit was prepared to lay down a marker in that 50 over World Cup. He was prepared to take risks early on in the first 10 overs to lay down a marker. And whether or not you like the fact that he consistently got to 47 off 28 balls and then got out trying to lay down that marker, England will feel like if India are trying to lay down a marker, that they're a chance. And what do England love? Opposition giving them a sniff. So if they're prepared to try and hit India off their length, England, I think, will like that. What I don't think they'll like particularly is India going, well, we're going to bat for 175 overs, guys. England have still got 300 enough. They've got enough overs to then still try and win the game themselves. But I think that doesn't play into England's hands if India don't advance the game.
Anything more we want to touch on before we start talking about predictions?
Let's do predictions.
Let's start with let's start with some individual player ones before we move on to. We'll finish with our kind of series predictions and why. Any one in particular you think is primed for a big series for India or England? Silence.
There's a guy who bats at 4 for India normally. He's pretty good.
I've got him on my piece of paper as well, actually.
I think for me, even if there's chaos, even if there's super turning wickets, even if the conditions, like they could play on the moon and Virat would still score runs. They could play on Jupiter and he'd still score runs. I think Jupiter
would be tough, isn't it?
Tough, heavy gas planet and also a lot of gravity, so not a lot of bounce. And anyway, I think Virat Kohli will be key for India. He will score the most runs in the series. He's going to be a huge player, and I think Jasprit Bumrah will have an excellent series for India. We've talked a lot about their spinners, but I actually think that he knocking the top off is going to be super important.
I will just jump on that and say I had Virat down on my piece of paper as well. I feel like he out of everyone in that series for the India-South Africa series, that was such a challenging series for batters, he still looked largely in control, which is something that almost every other player in that series did not. And he had a fantastic World Cup. It feels like a very long time ago now that we were talking about him as a player who was struggling, and now he feels like the best batter in the world again. And I really think that a series like this, he's going to be up for this. And I think he's going to have a massive, massive series.
No secret that he's the key wicket, but I'm expecting big things from him.
Yeah, look, I'll probably talk about England's players. I don't disagree with your comments on the Indian guys. I think Harry Brook's going to have a big series. I think he probably ill-advisedly made some comments after his 100 for Sunrisers in the IPL. So I think he's got a really, really big point to prove to the Indian fans. I think he's off the social media. I think he's going to let his Gray Nichols do the talking, and I think he's going to have a big series batting 5. And from a bowling perspective, I believe in fairy tales, and I think Jimmy Anderson's going to have a series. He's got a decent record in India with the ball, and I think he is still as fit as ever. Ashes notwithstanding, where his wicket tally wasn't there, but his speeds were still good, and he bowled a couple of spells without a great deal of luck. So I still think he's got the magic. So I think he's going to be the pick of the bowlers for England, and will prove his worth on this tour. So Brook and Anderson for the England team.
Complete side note: Anderson, do you think this is his last year? Is he going to retire after the home summer?
No idea.
Yeah?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Good. We shall see.
Do you think Bairstow's going to have a big series? Yes or no?
Yes.
Cool. I'm excited by that. I think I do, and I think he's super important for England because, if England are going to win the series, a couple of these guys in their batting lineup are going to have to win a Test match almost off their own bat. They're going to need to make 80 in a low-scoring game, or if it's a good batting wicket, a big daddy 100. And I think Johnny Bairstow batting at 6 can take a game away from sides, just as Harry Brook can.
Well, I think we saw last time when India were here, or when England were in India, it was the Joe Root show, right? It was basically when Joe Root got out that those games were over. I mean, I did do some research on Joe Root. He averages 60 against right and left arm off spinners, which is a phenomenal record. He averages 50 against those same spinners in India. He averages 72 against R.Ashwin, 53 against Jadeja, only 18 against Axar. I think that points to that series that happened. But his overall average in India is 50.
And that average of 18 against Axar in that series was 3 times the combined average of the rest of the team.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's the key wicket for England.
Series predictions. Who wins this series and why? Baldy, we'll start with you.
India win at 3-2. I think England have enough firepower and enough match winners in their side to take at least 1, possibly 2 tests off of India. And if we have turning wickets, if we have chaos, I think that evens out the playing field a little bit. I think it's going to be 3-2 3-2 to India.
Binksy?
I just really, really hope that this series lives up to the billing. I hope that we see some of the stuff that we want to see throughout the course of the series, and I think we will. I think we'll see. It will be exciting to watch regardless of the outcome, I think, because I don't think either side are going to play negative cricket. But I've got to say that India is the final and toughest frontier to crack, and I think regardless of how much promise this England side's got, I think they're on the wrong end of a 4-1 defeat in this series. But I don't think it will be a 4-1 shellacking. I think we'll see some entertaining cricket throughout the course of that.
Did you just read off my piece of paper? I mean, I pretty much have the same thing, because I really think that this series, as you said, I really, I have no horse in this race. I would love to see it be incredibly close. I would love to see one of these England batters just absolutely take to these spinners and kind of see how they react, see how an Ashwin, I love watching him bowl. I would love to see one of them really get stuck into him and watch Ashwin kind of figure them out and then kind of have to respond to that. I would love to see these games be very close, and I do think in that way it will be that India will ultimately come out on top, and 4-1 again would not surprise me. That's kind of what I'm thinking in terms of who will sort of be able to win the bigger moments, and I lean towards India because when we run through that lineup, and particularly their bowling lineup, those 5 bowlers, obviously Axar is the odd one out in terms of test wickets that they've got, and even Siraj in terms of overall test wickets. But in terms of in those conditions, what they offer, there's so much variety, there's so much skill there, and I think all of those players would have a pretty strong case to be in any test lineup at this point. So I just think that in a series where wickets are likely to be the key currency, I think that they have the better five-man unit of the two sides. But I do think England's going to put up a pretty good fight, and as you say, that these tests there'll be jeopardy in all these tests. I don't think that there'll be hammerings, or if there are, England will just come back and kind of figure something out to put India under pressure in that next test. So
that's what's so exciting about this test series, isn't it? That if either side gets hammered, it means nothing to them. They will keep coming at their opposition. They will come back with different plans, different ways of doing things. They'll attack from everywhere. It honestly, it is exciting for me from a neutral perspective of any series. I think I will be watching in the compared to the last 5 years. I'm so excited for this test series,
and it's on at super time in New Zealand as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, look, we will obviously have plenty more coverage of this series throughout the course of January all the way through until March. We'll also have the rest of the New Zealand summer on the Top Order podcast. If you do like the pod, please do give us a like, a subscribe, and share the pod with a friend, colleague, teammate, whatever you can to help us grow the pod. It really, really does help us to continue to bring the content to a salivating series coming up. India versus England. Let's see
Good luck.
Yeah, look, we'll need it, but let's see. See if any of our predictions are correct. But for now, it is good night and good bless from us all here on the Top Order podcast. We'll see you next time. See you later.